The message arrived a few minutes before sunset, just as the house finally fell quiet. It was short, casual, almost careless. "Mom, just heat the leftovers later. Don't waste anything." I stared at the screen longer than I should have, not because I didn't understand the words, but because of what they meant. New Year's Eve, the night people count down together, the night families hug, toast, promise to do better, and my role in all of that had just been reduced to leftovers. I placed the phone face down on the kitchen table and leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of the day settle into my bones. I had been awake since early morning, moving through the house with the quiet efficiency of someone who knows they are needed but not necessarily wanted. The smell of roasted meat still lingered in the air, mixed with the sweetness of dessert cooling by the window. The table was set carefully, plates aligned, glasses polished until they caught the light just right. I had even ironed the tablecloth, smoothing out every crease as if perfection might earn me a place at the table. All day I had told myself this was what love looked like now: helping, supporting, making things easier for my daughter. She was busy, stressed, juggling work, marriage, children. I understood that. I always had. That's what mothers do. We understand first and question later. When she came into the kitchen earlier, already dressed for the evening, she barely looked at me. Her hair was styled, her makeup flawless, her phone glued to her hand as messages kept lighting up the screen. I asked casually what time we were leaving. She hesitated, just for a second, then said they had decided to go out instead. A restaurant, friends, a better view of the fireworks. "You'll be more comfortable here, Mom," she said, as if that settled everything. Comfortable. Alone. I watched her walk out the door with her husband and the children, their laughter trailing behind them, the sound of excitement growing fainter with every step. The door closed softly, but the silence it left behind was heavy, pressing against my chest. I stood there for a long moment, still holding a dish towel in my hands, listening to the refrigerator hum and the clock tick toward midnight. Later, the notifications started. Photos, videos, a countdown written in bright numbers, glasses raised, smiles wide, a caption that read, "Starting the year with everyone who matters." I wasn't in any of them, not in the background, not cropped at the edge, nowhere. That was when the message came. "Just heat the leftovers later." I sat down slowly, my knees trembling more than I wanted to admit. I looked at my hands resting on the table, hands that had cooked, cleaned, cared, given, hands that had held my daughter when she cried as a child, that had worked double shifts, that had signed papers and made sacrifices she would never know about. I typed one word in response: "Okay." And as the sky outside began to glow with the first distant fireworks, something inside me shifted. The world was counting down to a new year, but I was counting something else. The number of times I had stayed silent, the number of times I had accepted being invisible, the number of times I had told myself this was enough. By the time the first explosion lit up the night, I understood something with absolute clarity. My New Year's Eve wasn't about celebration anymore. It was about a decision. And my real countdown had just begun. I didn't become invisible overnight. That's the part people never understand. Invisibility doesn't arrive with a warning. It settles in quietly, one small concession at a time, until one day you realize no one looks for you anymore. After my husband died, the house felt too big for one person, too quiet,
too full of memories that echoed when I walked from room to room. My daughter was the one who suggested I move in with her family. She said it would be temporary, just until I felt stronger, just until the loneliness softened. She said the children needed me. She said she needed me too. I sold my house a few months later, the place where I had spent decades raising her, where every wall held a story, where grief still clung to the corners. I told myself it was the sensible thing to do. A mother helps. A mother adjusts. A mother doesn't cling to the past when her child says there's a place for her. At first, it almost felt like belonging. I woke up early and made breakfast. I packed lunches, braided hair, folded tiny shirts with cartoon characters I didn't recognize. I told myself it was a privilege to still be useful. I told myself love changes shape with time. But slowly, something shifted. I stopped being asked. I started being expected. The days took on a rhythm that wasn't mine. I woke before everyone else and went to bed after the house was quiet again. I learned the exact way my daughter liked her coffee, the way she preferred the towels folded, the brand she bought because cheaper ones were a waste. If something was out of place, it was always my fault. If something went right, it simply went unnoticed. She stopped calling me by my name without realizing it. I became mom only when she needed something, and you when she was annoyed. I wasn't part of decisions anymore. I was part of maintenance. Family photos appeared on the walls, but I wasn't in them. Holidays came and went, and my place at the table became smaller, closer to the kitchen, easier to overlook. When guests came over, I was introduced as someone who helps out around the house, never as the woman who had built a life from nothing, never as her mother. I told myself not to be sensitive, not to make trouble, not to complain. I reminded myself that I was lucky to be there at all, that many women my age were alone, that gratitude should be enough to quiet the ache growing in my chest. But gratitude doesn't erase humiliation. It just teaches you how to swallow it. Little by little, I learned how to disappear without leaving. I learned how to smile while being ignored, how to say yes before being asked, how to shrink myself so I wouldn't be in the way. I convinced myself that this was the price of staying close to my daughter and grandchildren. I didn't realize that every time I chose silence, I was teaching them how little I mattered. And by the time New Year's Eve arrived, I wasn't a guest in that house anymore. I was a routine. New Year's Eve always carried a strange weight for me. It wasn't just the fireworks or the countdowns on television. It was the way the night demanded reflection. Another year survived, another year lost, another year proving how quickly life rearranges itself without asking permission. That morning, the house woke up buzzing with anticipation. My daughter moved through the rooms with purpose, her phone glued to her hand, answering messages, checking reservations, confirming plans. There was laughter, music playing softly from a speaker, bags being packed near the door. Everything smelled like preparation and excitement. I moved quietly around them, like I had learned to do. I cleaned the kitchen, wiped the counters, started a pot of soup without being asked. Old habits die hard. When you spend long enough being useful, you start doing things before anyone realizes they need to be done. Around noon, I finally asked, casually, as if it didn't matter much, "So, what time should I start getting ready tonight?" She looked up from her phone for just a second, not long enough to really see me. "Oh," she said, distracted.
"We're going out early. There's a dinner, then fireworks downtown." "We." The word hung in the air for a moment longer than it should have. I waited for the rest of the sentence, for the part where she told me what to wear, or what time we were leaving, or where we'd be sitting. Instead, she turned back to her screen and kept typing. The silence answered for her. By late afternoon, the house was filled with movement. The kids ran around in new clothes. My daughter tried on outfits, rejecting one after another. Laughter echoed down the hallway. The mirror in the bedroom reflected a woman celebrating, glowing, alive. I stood in the doorway holding a folded sweater I had just finished ironing. She didn't notice. They left just after sunset. Quick goodbyes, rushed kisses on the cheek. Someone said, "Don't wait up." The door closed behind them with a soft final sound that felt louder than it should have. The house fell into that familiar quiet, the kind that presses against your ears. I sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of soup I didn't really want. Outside, I could already hear distant fireworks. People somewhere were cheering, clinking glasses, counting blessings. I watched the clock inch forward, minute by minute, toward a new year that felt exactly like the last one. At 9:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. I picked it up without thinking, a small spark of hope rising before I could stop it. Maybe she was checking on me. Maybe she realized something. Maybe she remembered. The message was short, practical, casual. "Mom, don't forget to heat the leftovers. Don't let them go to waste." I read it once, then again. There was no malice in the words, no insult that could be pointed to directly. And yet something inside me cracked open with a quiet, final sound. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was clarity. In that moment, standing alone in a kitchen I helped maintain, on a night meant for renewal, I finally understood my place in that house. I wasn't family. I was maintenance. And something inside me knew, deep, undeniable, irreversible, that I would not be stepping into the new year the same way I entered the last one. I stared at the screen for a long moment after reading the message. Heat the leftovers. Such ordinary words, the kind people send without thinking.
And maybe that was the worst part. She hadn't meant to hurt me. She hadn't even considered me. To her, I was simply part of the house, like the refrigerator, like the stove, like something you remind yourself to turn off before leaving. I placed the phone face down on the table and sat there in silence, listening to the faint echo of fireworks popping somewhere far away. Each one sounded like a door closing, each one marking another second of a life that no longer included me. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I had cried before, quietly in bathrooms late at night when no one could hear. But this time something different happened. A strange calm settled over E, steady and cold. The kind of calm that comes when you finally stop hoping for things to change. I walked to the refrigerator and opened it. Inside were the leftovers from the night before. Carefully packed containers, labeled in her handwriting. Food from a dinner I hadn't been invited to. Food meant to last them days. I closed the door without touching anything. Then I went upstairs. My room was small, tucked at the end of the hallway. It had slowly become a storage space for things no one else wanted. Old furniture, boxes of forgotten decorations, bags of clothes meant for donation that never left the house. Somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like a bedroom and started feeling like a waiting room. I stood in the center of it and looked around. The bed I slept in, the dresser I shared with spare linens.
The suitcase in the closet I hadn't used since my husband was alive, and that's when I knew. This wasn't impulse, this wasn't drama, this wasn't revenge. This was survival. I pulled the suitcase out and laid it open on the bed. Slowly, deliberately, I began choosing what to take. Not everything, just what was mine. Clothes I bought with my own money, photos that still smelled faintly of old albums and dust, the watch my husband gave me on our 20th anniversary. Each item felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I moved quietly, aware that at any moment they could come home early, but the house remained empty, echoing, unaware that something irreversible was unfolding inside its walls. At some point, I stopped packing and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands rested on my knees, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I thought about the years I had given, the meals cooked, the childcare, the silence I swallowed, the way I had shrunk myself to fit into a space where love was conditional and respect was optional. I thought about the message again. Don't let them go to waste. A bitter smile touched my lips. I had already wasted enough. Downstairs, another firework exploded in the distance. Midnight was getting closer. And for the first time in a long while, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of staying. And that fear, finally, was stronger than the one that had kept me there for years. The days after New Year's Eve passed slowly, each one heavier than the last. It wasn't just the memory of that night. It was the realization that it hadn't been an exception. It had been a pattern. A quiet, invisible role I had accepted for years without noticing. The helper, the one who understood, the one who didn't demand space, attention, or care. I replayed my daughter's message in my mind more times than I could count. Not the words themselves, but the tone, the ease with which she had dismissed me, as if I were an inconvenience to be managed instead of a mother to be welcomed, as if my presence required justification. I began to ask myself painful questions I had avoided for decades. When did I start shrinking to fit into their lives? When did I teach them that my feelings could wait? When did love become something I proved through silence? I thought of all the sacrifices I had made without ever naming them as such. The dreams postponed, the loneliness endured quietly after their father died, the holidays where I smiled so they wouldn't feel guilty, the countless moments where I chose peace over truth, believing that was what good mothers did. But silence, I realized, doesn't protect love. It only teaches others how little it costs to ignore you. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of me. Writing felt terrifying, because once the words existed, I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I wasn't writing to accuse. I wasn't writing to beg. I was writing because my heart was tired of being unheard. I wrote slowly, honestly. I told her how that message had made me feel, how that night broke something fragile inside me, how I loved her deeply, but could no longer pretend that being forgotten didn't hurt. I didn't ask for apologies. I didn't ask for explanations. I only asked to be seen. When I finished, my hands were shaking, not from anger, but from relief, because for the first time in years, I had chosen myself without abandoning my love. A few days later, I stood by the mailbox longer than necessary, the cold air biting at my skin, the envelope heavy in my hands. My name was written on the back in careful letters, as if even my handwriting hesitated. That envelope carried more than words. It carried decades of unspoken truth. Dropping it inside felt like letting go of something I had carried alone for too long. I didn't expect forgiveness. I didn't expect understanding. I didn't even expect a response. What I needed was for my pain to stop living only inside me. Life didn't change overnight. The house was still quiet. The mornings still felt long. Sometimes I still reached for my phone instinctively, hoping, without admitting it, that a message might appear. But something inside me had shifted. The silence was no longer suffocating. It had become space. Space to breathe, space to remember who I was before I became invisible. Space to understand that love should never require erasing yourself. I began to see my life differently, not as a series of losses, but as proof of endurance. I had loved deeply, I had given everything I could, and I was still here, still worthy of warmth, still deserving of a seat at the table. If my daughter responds someday, I will listen. If she doesn't, I will survive, because healing doesn't always arrive through others. Sometimes it begins the moment we decide we matter too. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you of a message you never sent, a boundary you were afraid to set, or a holiday that left you feeling invisible, know this: you are not alone. Subscribe for more emotional true stories that give voice to life after 50. Like this video if you believe dignity should never expire with age. And share this story with someone who might need the courage to choose themselves this new year. Some stories don't end with answers. They end with strength, and sometimes that is enough.